This video is on the objective differentiate between type 1 and type 2 errors when performing a hypothesis test. This is number 1, so this is the first video I'm doing on a question related to this objective in your Newton-Alta homework. Now, I've already talked about type 1 errors before in previous objectives, previous videos. Hopefully you've been watching. But just to refresh your memory, I've got a paper here reminding us of what a type 1 error is when you're performing a hypothesis test. All right, a type 1 error is when you reject the null hypothesis, but you shouldn't have. Right? It's when you reject the null hypothesis, but the null hypothesis was in fact a true statement. Right? So you made a boo-boo, you made an error. Okay. And the value alpha, right? Remember the significance level or the area of the rejection region if you were talking about, doing hypothesis testing with critical values and rejection regions. That was that alpha. Well, another way to interpret alpha is also the probability of making a type 1 error, right? It's the probability of rejecting the null hypothesis, when you shouldn't have, right? When the null hypothesis was in fact true. All right, so that's a type 1 error. Now a type 2 error. This is something new. So again, it's an error, right? It's a mistake that you could possibly make when performing a hypothesis test. The type 2 error is you fail to reject, you don't reject the null hypothesis, but you should have. You fail to reject the null hypothesis when the null hypothesis was false. So again, that means you didn't reject the null, you accepted it, right? You accept the null hypothesis, but you shouldn't have, right? It's actually a false statement in reality, and you should have rejected it, but you didn't. That's a mistake. That's an error. Right? And this is called a type 2 error when performing hypothesis tests. And then you're going to see now this new Greek letter. This is the Greek letter beta. It just looks like a B, fancy B. And alpha represented the probability of making a type 1 error. You're going to see this value called beta, and it's a percentage, it's a probability, and this is going to represent the probability of making a type 2 error when performing a hypothesis test, right? The probability of making a type 2 error, right? Of not rejecting the null when you should have, right? When the null is actually false. Okay, so now that you got these down, let's go to the question. Now again, if you want to see more about it, you're unfamiliar with the topic, please click on more instruction, see their videos, their notes, their examples, and maybe they'll help you. Hopefully they do. So here, determine the type 1 error if the null hypothesis, H0, is the following. 65% of college students will graduate with debt. And the alternative hypothesis, HA, is the following. Researchers claim that researchers claim more than 65% of college students will graduate with debt. All right. So this would be a right-tailed test and all that, but that's not what they're asking here. They're asking what would be a type 1 error in this situation if you were performing a hypothesis test where the null hypothesis was that the percentage of students that will graduate with debt is equal to 65%. And the alternative hypothesis is that the percentage that will graduate with debt is greater than or more than 65%. So remember, type 1 error is you're rejecting the null hypothesis. So you don't accept this. It means you accept the alternate. You accept the alternative hypothesis, but you should have accepted the null, right? You reject it when you shouldn't have, right? You reject the null, but you shouldn't have. You should have kept it. That's a type 1 error. So a type 1 error would be you accepted the alternate. You conclude that more than 65% of college students will graduate with debt, but in actuality, the null hypothesis was true. You should have kept the null. So let's read through these. So the researchers conclude that more than 65% of college students will graduate with debt, when in fact 65% exactly will. That is exactly a type 1 error. That's exactly what I was saying. You conclude the alternate hypothesis when you should have concluded the null. That's a type 1 error. And again, please read through answer explanations. When you write, just to make sure that your reasoning was correct, but especially read through them when you're incorrect. All right, just to see if you can figure out where you went wrong, and next time you see a problem like that, hopefully you'll do better. All right, and I don't believe there's a second part to this. Let's see. Nope. So hopefully watching that helped you out. I'll do another video, a number 2 for this, and thank you very much for watching.